Casey, welcome to the show.
Hey, Pete. Thanks for having me.
I am stoked to have you here. Let me set up a little bit of context for anybody listening. So Blogging Guide, I've actually seen on and off for quite a while. Casey is the human behind Blogging Guide. It's just bloggingguide.com. I want to get that out there. But more recently, you were on a mutual friend of ours, Spencer's podcast and or YouTube channel. I found it on YouTube. And you were talking about some of your more recent website experiments, I guess you could say. And you specifically mentioned two websites that you started in early 2023, one of which did super well and is very impressive. And I want to ask you questions about that. One of which you mentioned didn't do quite as well. And that piqued my interest. So I watched that YouTube video, heard Casey talk about a bunch of this stuff, and I was like, I have so many more questions, and I literally have them in front of me on my notes. And so I'm excited to ask you these. But obviously not everybody listening went and listened to that episode with Spencer. So let's do a relatively short version of the Casey backstory. So why don't you walk us through how you got into blogging, digital marketing, online entrepreneurship, like the whole thing. Like roughly what year was this? What was your background before that? How did you get into this?
Sure. So my sort of beginning into digital marketing was more through the digital PR side. So I worked for a lobbying firm here in DC that also did PR and strategic communications. So I kind of came at it from a almost online reputation management perspective background. I was aware of SEO as a practitioner. I didn't think of it as like SEO at the time. Like I said, we used ORM was sort of the term we used, but ooh, yeah, right. but basically it was SEO, and I always had fun doing side projects, building, different websites. I've done pretty much all the, ways you can make money online. I've done hundreds of Amazon KDP books. I just enjoyed writing a lot personally. So I actually was kind of just prolifically cranking out content, I guess from about 2015 to 2018, kind of just on the side. And I made some money doing that. And I did some ghost writing gigs for some interesting publications. And so, yeah, my background was actually in writing, like that, which is sort of odd given the topic today. But I actually was, and still think of myself to some extent as like kind of a true blogger, although I'm now experimenting with all these different AI and outsourced technologies that would have replaced me, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we can come back to the AI replacing writers or whatnot, because I actually find that an interesting subject. Okay, so 2015, 2018, doing some sites here and there. I always feel like disclosing this, by the way. Like, we could talk about your newest website, which makes like 20K a month. Like, I think you just hit that mark a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of beginners are like, oh, wow, that's amazing. And I think it's also just important to note that it wasn't literally your first website ever created. Like,
no, and I try to include this disclaimer with everything I do in every article. In fact, the entire case study, the whole reason I included two sites in it was I expected divergent outcomes, and I couldn't have been more right. The sites did wildly different. Yet nobody focuses on the site that just sort of had mediocre or below average or whatever performance. But your all your caveats are great. Like, this was not my first site. I'm probably like 50 sites in at this point, and I've had some big ones. This isn't my biggest, but it's not the biggest in my current portfolio either, but it's in the last few months, it's jumped significantly. It's number 2 or 3 now. Yeah.
Well, no one wants to talk about the failed site except for this guy.
Yeah.
Because I have questions about that. But let's actually do Oh, so let's talk about the most recent successful site first
Sure.
for a couple of minutes. And there are two of the biggest question marks I had when I was listening to your other chat with Spencer. I'm going to tell you both of them, and then maybe we'll just take them one by one. Future, I'm doing air quotes for those who can't see me. Future niche selection. How you chose your specific niche. You had mentioned something about like future topics or topics that might be more relevant in the future. I have questions about that. And then second, specifically keyword research. You had mentioned that you had, this is like you don't let me put words in your mouth, but from my perspective, this is like a bulk content type of case study. You've been literally hundreds of posts per month for a while there from what I remember. And I think you even said you had like 700 of the keywords or the specific articles or whatever. You had several hundred ready to go, researched before you did the site. And so my head was tickling there, like, I would actually just like Casey to teach me how he did that. Because Pete struggles with this in some cases.
You picked up on two of the sort of more important points that people tend to gloss over. I mean, there's a like, I know that sounds obvious, but like niche selection cannot be,
it's just massively.
Yeah, no, it's everything. And, people obviously don't like hearing that because they're probably already starting on a project. So that advice might be to basically go back to the drawing board, which is, I agree. Like, I never would have listened to that, and I wouldn't want to deter somebody from pursuing their project. This is just, though, one of those things for if you're starting a new project today, or if this was not my main project, this was a side experiment that I started. Mm-hmm. So I think you have to view it, through that lens. And the other kind of point you made sort of about there was niche selection and then actually sort of the topical mapping of the site. That is something I did differently this time that I've never completely done on another site, where I literally, I used to have a whiteboard actually, but it got too big for that. I literally diagrammed out, starting with just sort of basically what I think of as just the article ideas. And so these are sort of like what initially strike me as sort of concepts or things within the niche that I have a feeling. This is not based on keyword research. These are things that, as someone who has experience in the niche, I think are interesting. I generally am not aware of a lot of people really covering these specifically, and I jotted those down. And some of those end up being basically, in the end, duplicates, or they can be folded into one article. But the first step is just to kind of jot that all down. And so I have this kind of unwieldy map at first. And once you kind of jot those down, you can consolidate, like I said, the topics. Only after I do that do I really get into sort of slightly SEO optimizing, like the titles, and thinking about how it's going to fit into a search strategy. And I this site, didn't just do well. It did well during one of the rougher periods for bloggers. I mean, the site started in January and survived like 7 or 8 updates that decimated most blogs, during this time. And this is a brand, there's no domain authority. This is essentially a fresh site. Yeah, so that's I think the topical mapping is definitely key here.
Okay, I have so many questions. Hang on, give me like 3 seconds.
Yeah.
Why'd it survive? Okay, we're gonna come back to these. So let's go deeper. I'm gonna resist the urge to keep plowing forward about exactly everything you just mentioned, but let's go back to the niche selection.
Okay.
So you used ChatGPT to kind of work your way towards this niche. Is that correct? By the way, he's not going to mention the site. He's not going to mention the niche of the name or whatever.
No,
So,
sorry. If anyone was looking for an easy win to rip off, no, that unfortunately won't be this podcast. And I do have a lot of experience building sites.
right.
If you want to search for it, I go ahead. But like I said, I'm very open that the site is not run by me. There's a persona associated with the site. But I am genuinely part of the niche, and my experiences are authentic, and so I will add that in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, here's a good way to phrase this. If you were doing it again today for a news site, let's go that direction. So you could tell us exactly the words you used when you chose your niche, but I think it's more interesting to say, if you had to follow a similar approach today, if you're doing a news site, what is this future niche that I'm holding up air quotes again? What is this future niche that you were talking about?
So really just referring to the fact that the niche I was specifically interested in was a topic that I had studied. I had taken a few classes in college on, so this is not like a unknown topic, but it's something that's gained a lot of interest in the past few years. So there are incumbents in the space. There are people writing about it. It's not like somehow, the entire industry has missed the mark on this, but
Right.
but it was vastly like a lot of topics, it wasn't covered by people who were actually in the industry or had any sort of passion about it. So a lot of the, for instance, you do a lot of content about podcasting, and that would be like, I could crank out like a million, articles very easily using tools like Koala, and, I could probably rank for them, but do I have hundreds of hours of experience interviewing people, using equipment, like just knowing the little nuances? No. So if it would be kind of like that, where if all of a sudden we were transitioning from podcasting to, let's say, like you're kind of broadcasting in the metaverse, and so there was a fundamental shift in what I'm talking about. So it's existing technology, but it's changing. And so I have some background in it, but essentially nobody needs like a formal background in the very latest iteration, because nobody has enough experience to really, be a subject matter expert per se.
Yeah. It's like there are people writing about it or talking about it, but there's probably very few giants that have extensively covered this like for the past like 30 years, right? It's not
there's
That's interesting.
no, it's only there were no I think most people, if they were doing the keyword research and sort of popping this in Ahrefs or trying to validate the traffic, they would have just said there's not nearly enough to even support getting on to Mediavine, let alone 10xing that, which is what this
Those
did.
are my favorite niches.
And yeah, that is for a time effective, sort of cost efficient project. That's what you're looking for. I mean, I'm looking for, and everyone always complains about how every niche is tapped out and all that. I mean, if you stick to the same like 8 broad niches, and you have like lifestyle, travel, pets, cooking, health and fitness, yes, like you're going to have like incredible competition. And I've been in those spaces, and I've done well with some I haven't. And the idea with this was I was passionate about it, and it was basically an underserved in terms of the content that was out there. And I figured if I could build it, this was also really a case study for myself about something I had stumbled upon, which was kind of now more referred to as Topical Authority. But the concept of really building a site that covers a topic in its entirety, and very deliberately, in my definition, excludes any content that's not topically relevant. So there might be relevant search queries, all the people also ask, and all these long tail, phrases. But the idea is you don't want to produce just a kind of spammy looking site. The idea is that you find, okay, what are the 700 essential articles this site needs? And I actually just finished it 2 days ago. So at the site is, it was November, I think 24th, I planned this out of 2022. And I stuck to that. I had to try so hard, Pete, not to, like, when I stumbled across an article that did well, to not follow my instincts and double down on related traffic. But the whole premise of this experiment was that by really sticking to the true intent of the topic in the long run, although it went vastly faster than I could have ever imagined, in the long run, that basically Google would understand that this site is not just sort of mining traffic, that this site, is kind of almost like if a hobbyist knew what they were doing high level SEO and they started the perfect site with all the knowledge up front. And I have built many blogs over the years, so I, as you noted, like, I had that experience. And I've always strayed when you find topics and keywords that hit. Of course, you take those wins. Like this time, it was more about saying no to like all this, because some people are like, how could this even be a topic if there's only 700 posts? Like, how could that be the entire sort of scope of it? But I wasn't trying to cover sort of every tangential question. I basically picked the intersection of like two niches, and I said nothing outside that mutually overlapping, category. The example I use is basically, this is the closest example I can give probably, is a topic I thought was neat but didn't do a blog on. But if someone wants to, they should. But this would be too competitive, but it's a good example, is there's this concept called stealth wealth, which is sort of about living, sort of, it's the whole like, you have money, but you're sort of the millionaire next door. You're trying to keep like a low profile, not attract attention. It's kind of like just a neat like thing. And that's kind of the example I've been giving for this to help people understand, is if you were to do like a site about stealth wealth, you basically have the intersection of privacy and personal finance, right? There is like infinite things on either side of those that, of the exclusive side of the Venn diagram that you could do. But the key is I'm looking for the 700 or however many in this case that would be, probably a lot more, but however many overlapping topics there are that, like I said, largely cover the topic in its entirety. So it has to be narrow enough. I wouldn't go after something that I thought had more than, say, 2,000 articles. I didn't want that. The idea was to actually completely cover a topic and see how Google responded. And knowing what I know today, if I were starting a site tomorrow, in fact, I'm working on a number of sites. So I just started a new one yesterday. So this is like very relevant. I'm not applying everything I learned, but I'm applying a lot of the principles, and I'm really trying to plan things out and just sort of execute and use tools like AI purely to help execute in a timely and organized fashion. It's not so much that I'm unwilling to go through the process. I've had teams of writers work for me. I like writing. I can crank out content, but I can't compete with the content velocity of a really well-crafted first draft of AI that
Yeah.
I then edit. That's like pretty hard to compete with. I mean,
Yeah.
so
I will. You don't even know about this, but it's fine. I'll self-promote for just a second.
yeah, go ahead.
but also go to something important you said on this other mystical podcast with Spencer that no one listening to this probably listened to, but something you said that I really appreciated. You know the GIF where it's like preach, like, oh, preach, Casey. It was when I think Spencer asked you about, I don't remember exactly what he said, but basically SEO optimization, and specifically like on-page SEO, and using tools like Surfer SEO or Rank Math or Rank whatever. There's like a million of them.
Yeah.
Right? And something you said in there, I don't want to go too deep into it right now because I actually have too many questions, but you were basically just like, no. Like, I write for the topic. Like, I write for, you didn't say this either, but I think you meant it. Like, you write for the human that clicks on it and search or whatever. And I had somebody email me. Oh, it doesn't matter. I was going to, one of my users, so I created a bulk content tool. It's called fab.ai. One of my users emailed me. She's like, hey, can we like integrate this with like Surfer or like one of these other tools? And I was like, no, just stop. Like, that's not what you should be caring about. I'm sorry. I was going to ramble. I actually don't want to talk about that because I have so many questions. But if you want to respond, go ahead.
No, you characterized it completely right. And I was like, yeah, not only do I not think that's good practice, but I genuinely did not use a single sort of on-page writing tool. Basically, the only reason AI was efficient for this is I had refined sort of the prompts enough, and this niche happened to work. That's the other thing is you can't just cram every niche into this. There are some that are not compatible with AI. You have to play around with it. You never know what will work and what won't. And the other thing with that is that, you know, some of these niches, like, they're not that hard to interlink, but like for me, I spend a lot of time on internal linking, and the fact that now like tools like Koala have it built in where it maps your site. Like, this didn't even exist when I started the project, but in the last few weeks here, the fact that I can now have it intelligently map and link to each new article in real time as I'm writing it, that's a pretty big advantage. So I had to do that still manually for almost the entire process for this first site. The reason I'm bullish on starting other ones is that's all done automatically now. So the benefits of AI are still coming out. You know,
sure.
Chat GPT was not like the pinnacle of this, you know, like that was like a proof of concept for like mainstream sort of consumption. You know, you have to find these little advantages and just kind of run with them. And one thing I noticed, like I said, you know, I spend hours on internal linking. Sure, there are some tools that do it automated, but they're all sort of, they all have their own flaws. And I found that this was a much more organic way of doing that.
Yeah. I just released my internal linking and affiliate linking feature in fab.ai. Fab.ai. I'm self-promoting because that's new. All right. Casey, something I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
It's this idea of 700 articles. And you mentioned Topical Authority. You mentioned literally drawing out like a topical map. Topical mapping, I think, is the word you used. So you're starting more sites. You said you started one yesterday or was researching it yesterday or whatnot.
Yeah.
And you even mentioned like stealth wealth. And then in my head, as you were talking about this, I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'm in the personal finance community and have been for like a decade. I feel like that's like right in my wheelhouse. I'm not going to start that site. But I was thinking like 700 articles. And then you mentioned like, oh yeah, that'd probably be like, you know, we could do like 2,000 or something like that. And my mind was like, how? Like, walk me through the steps. Quite literally, like I don't have my whiteboard behind me, but I got a whiteboard somewhere down here. Walk me through the steps of, okay, I think I've gotten a niche that I really want to test out. I'm interested in, etc. How do we get to that 700? Or not specifically 700, but you know what I mean? Like walk me
Yeah.
through this topical mapping like step by step.
Yeah, and to be clear, yes, that example, I'm not sure what I didn't do the full exercise, so I don't know what the number is. It might be lower, like you said. 700 off the top of my head sounds like a lot, but if we're talking about the entirety of what you can discover over, say, a year, you have to, I think, multiply whatever you can think of off the top of your head times 50 or something like that if you're really gonna ultimately dive deep. That's just where it was in this case 700. But anyway, to use the stealth wealth example, again, I haven't done the full exercise, nor is it my expertise, but like I said, it's kind of like the fun articles I would read and some of the things I might indirectly practice. So I would, for one example, I've kind of on a few forums talked about is like if I were doing this and I was writing, let's say, about offshore bank accounts, because if you're doing, you're the type of person that thinks that's cool. You want to know, like, how do I, Pete, as a normal guy, law-abiding citizen, but somebody who just has a penchant for privacy. How do I, really have my, I'm trying to just think of what the group mindset would be. How do I, like, what would be exciting? What would catch my attention? So you might have an article, probably have more than one, but one article about, let's say, specific offshore banks could be simple, could be best, but it would be more likely something even more specific. You probably would have like the few jurisdictions, and again, I don't actually know this, but let's say, you might have the Cayman Islands, you might have like Lesotho, you might have all these like random articles, and the temptation with most people would be to basically then do, okay, we've talked about, a couple of these obscure countries which are relevant to the topic because they actually have sort of this layer of anonymity or something that the inside group would sort of identify with. But if we did like then best Canadian bank or like best Canadian banks or whatever, like under the same sort of cluster, that's something that will definitely get clicks, and there's immense volume for, like, I'm sure, way more than the obscure, money hiding havens of the world. Just because, it's Canada, it'd be like US, it's a big search term. But if Canada is not topically associated with, like, and it has nothing to do with stealth wealth, nobody puts their money in Canada to hide it. And like I said, maybe they do, I don't know. But if Canada is not known for that, then I think that's like a good example of like you chasing basically keyword volume. You might intend to be useful and you might write the best article anyone's ever seen about Canadian banking, but to me that's deviating from the topical map, because your audience is looking for these other topics that are going to catch their interest, and we know that fundamentally they're not looking for, like, they're not comparing like just every country on the planet. They're narrowing their focus to ones that have these certain characteristics. So I would avoid, like, in that case, writing a lot of the highest volume potential articles. So that's kind of, that would be like one article I would start with. And then, you have to iterate this thought exercise. And this is where like Chat GPT is good, because sometimes even if you know a topic well, like, you have trouble coming up with things and you need to think of it in a different way. So usually I'd come up with like that first kind of concept, like the offshore banking, or the like
In my
I
head,
don't-
that's like categories. Would you, like, if you're drawing out bubbles on a big whiteboard, would that be like some of the first few big bubbles would be like different categories?
Well, the other thing I do is which is maybe a little different in the process, but I don't create the formal categories until after the map, after all the ideas are sort of out there.
Sure. You mean like what the actual like WordPress category is going to be titled?
Yeah, and even just sort of higher, like, so that one I'm thinking is literally just one article. That's one of, like I said, there might be a little more to that one. I think that's a bigger topic, but let's say, okay, there's maybe 3 or 4 articles in that, like, at most. Again, we're not going to go wild and do like an entire cluster of, reviewing every bank. We're also not going to, like, compare banks that don't have like the relevant sort of privacy, if we're not just, like I said, going after things for search volume. So if you're in the in group, if you're somebody looking for this, you've probably already done Google searches. You probably are aware, like, off the top of your head, of like 5 to 10 locations, and you want either those locations and a more nuanced perspective of why, or you want to find the few outliers that nobody's included. And so in addition to having the consensus recommendation, you want to have those few hidden gems. But again, they shouldn't be something that's just for search traffic. It should be something that's actually useful to the reader. Like maybe, I don't know, Austria or something like that in that case. So,
well, this is one of those circumstances where I feel compelled to mention that it's super difficult. I'm sure you'll agree with this. I'm going to put words in Casey's mouth right now. Super difficult to start a content channel, podcasting, or YouTube, or anything that you don't actually know. Not that you have to be the world's bona fide stealth wealth expert, but I would never ever start this site because I don't know what the heck. Pete doesn't make enough money apparently to be into this, right? I'm not an expert at all.
Yeah, and that's why, like, I'm sure on the personal finance side, like, you could add a lot, and I'm sure, like, everybody can draw, privacy inferences from their own life. But, like, again, like I said, if you want this to, like, just be a magnet for people, and you want it to be basically something that when Google eventually, when Google, you won't get this right away, but if you stick to narrow topical authority, and this is true of all the sites, like I said, some of them don't have the same potential, and that's kind of getting to the second site that may just have been not the right niche, like, to have picked.
Yeah.
So
a smooth transition.
Yeah,
Casey. That's a smooth transition. Well, we don't have that much time left, even though I have more questions. Let's talk briefly, actually, one, and then we'll come back to the site that didn't work as well.
Yeah.
I hate to talk about tools so much because now more than ever they just change, and what works for somebody doesn't necessarily work for somebody else. But I'll ask, besides a literal whiteboard, what are some other helpful tools that could help with this topical mapping approach? And if you want to throw out SEO tools, by all means. But I also mean like mind mapping software or bullet point software. Like I use Dynalist, and what's the other one I used to use? It doesn't matter. But any other tools that you find helpful in that process?
Honestly, I keep it pretty simple. I forget what it's even called, but like a notepad app that syncs just between like my phone and desktop, where I would jot down ideas that might come to me, and I'd later, either realize they're relevant or maybe not so relevant. But I think while you're browsing the internet, so this is like a typical SEO tool, but not maybe the typical use, is Keywords Everywhere. That's like a pretty basic and cheap like tool. Like it works out to very little, like $1 a month, and depending on how much you search. But if you use that over the course of, let's say, a month or two, and there are certain topics that you just for fun. Maybe you don't even realize it. Maybe they're news articles, maybe whatever. You end up searching for these topics a bunch. When you leave that on and you start to see like the keyword indicators, like, okay, almost all these are like zeros, and then you start for the traffic, and then you see one with 10 or 50, something like that, and you're like, a lot of these zero keyword ones are actually probably a lot bigger, but the easy wins there might just be to test it, to start with something that just, if it's at all registering on tools like that, chances are it's probably 4 or 5 times that at least. Sometimes it's like 100 times that. So that's really important to understand. But this was like a topic that I Googled like obsessively, and I left keywords everywhere on, and you do sort of get a rhythm after a while where you start to notice, once you start to compare like actual articles and see how they perform, it does become a little more intuitive. And I think it helps to have something that's like a baseline sort of across just your general search. If you're trying to figure out how much has this topic been covered, how much are people actually searching for this keyword versus the topic, because like I said, again, a lot of people probably don't know the term stealth wealth. Like there are probably plenty of people who'd be interested in that who are like, no, I'm like a privacy zealot or a personal finance guy. Like that's my thing. Like they may never have even heard the term. So if stealth wealth didn't have like, 1 million search volume, that would not be a deterrent. You have to really, it's not just semantic search. You have to actually like think through what they are trying to get at there. So
yeah, you mentioned groupthink or group mind or something a little while ago, and I thought that was a specific strategy. And again, don't let me put words in your mouth, but it sounds like you keep coming back to this idea of topical authority. It's also just kind of a niche built towards an avatar rather than a topic.
Yes.
Meaning somebody's into stealth wealth, whether they call it that or not. Exactly. They're into privacy, they're into money, and they're into these other things. And I think if somebody were focused on that topic, they would do the Canada article, right? They would be like, the best Canadian bank for like X, Y, and Z, even if that's not really what that avatar is interested in. And it sounds like you mentioned this earlier, like putting yourself in the shoes of this avatar, this group of people who are into this, like whatever it is, to find out what they might be searching, what they might be asking, what they might be thinking, and all this other sort of stuff. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, you're
anybody listening, but
no, but that's completely right. It is more of a persona. I think it's easier to first just broadly think of it as mapping the topic, but you're right. Ultimately, you're only doing that exercise to figure out who your audience is, maybe, and then you sort of are retargeting toward them. So that, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we only got another couple of minutes, but really quickly, let's talk about the quote unquote failed site. You started these sites roughly about the same time. Why do you think, if you had to name like 2 or 3 reasons why this other site didn't work out, what would you start pointing to?
Well, first thing the first thing I would mention is that this second site is a very different niche. This wasn't like a perfect, controlled experiment. So it's entirely possible that, when doing this, as you can imagine, you could get way too specific and perhaps there is not the volume you think there is. Or, as I think what happened in the second site's case, was it basically was actually surprisingly broader than it. I thought I was going too specific, but in reality, the deeper I dove, the more topics there were to cover, and I realized that this was not like a 500 article, niche like I had planned out. This was more like a 2,000 article one. So to reach the same like level of topical relevancy or coverage or whatever, I would have to produce more articles. And I've continued with that, albeit at a slower pace. But that site is actually showing promise. That's the other thing, is that the first site, I did have some like sort of SEO advantage in that I had simply registered the site and threw up just like a what I call a shell site, basically like a site that's basically just like, the basic legal pages and a few blog posts that sort of help set the topic. So broad strokes kind of articles related to it. I threw that up about, I don't know, at least 6 months in advance on the other one. So that site was just simply indexing much faster. If you actually like exclude these first few, like the first 6 months basically of the second case study site, it's actually not that dissimilar, the traffic. So last month,
that's great news.
Yeah, so last month it took longer, but it's starting to double. It's had 2 months in a row basically where the traffic has doubled. That's where this site sort of started at a lower number, but it started having that, compound effect really early. So this site actually, and that, like I said, obviously when you reach a certain critical mass, then you can get into different ad networks, and the total earnings, just go up across the board because RPMs are higher. But even on Google, and I wasn't even going to put this on, I don't normally put sites on AdSense. I don't really think it's worth the money usually. I'm like, I'd rather have better user experience, get to 50,000, or I have sites on Raptive so I can do 25 case sessions on that, or 30,000 page views, for that one. So whichever of the two I kind of hit first. So basically, this site was had a slower start, but if it continued at this rate, and I'm not saying it will, but if it did continue at this rate, it would only be like 3 to 4 months before it hits the like ad network level. But for reference, it is earning like, now this month it'll be like $200 a month. The site only cost a total of 400 in AI credits, and I've gone like 700 or 800 articles deep already since then. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. So so like I really only think I need like about 1,000 for this one. The answer, is somewhere in between, but so only cost me 400. Obviously plus my time, which is not nothing, but out of pocket that plus maybe 100 for like hosting and domains and other, little fees like that for the first year. But this is a site that, like I said, will probably do even just a couple hundred a month on AdSense. Like if and when it gets into Mediavine, it'll be like a $2 or $3 grand a month, like just at that level to start with site. So I haven't written it off. Like I part of why I like this study is I like the first niche more. So it also, that, to answer your question, that also could skew the results.
For sure.
I definitely had more of an interest in it. It was like more of like a labor of love. Like I did stuff on the site that may or may not affect its ranking, but just made it look nice. And, I played around with it a little more. The second site was like, again, an add-on to do this experiment. It's I don't want to say it's like a stepchild, but
that's the first word that came to my mind when you said that.
It's kind of it. I don't think they got equal treatment, and so it's not a perfect like comparison, but the same technique was applied. And the good thing is the second site, while it hasn't grown as fast, I also didn't have to spend all the money up front that I did on the other site hiring the initial. I seeded the site with content that I wrote and a few other writers for the first few articles just to give it like a real boost to make sure it started off on the right foot. This other one, not only has it been AI since post one, but like the editing is like probably half that of the first site. So if this site works, arguably the second, if the second site works, it's arguably more valuable because I don't have to spend like, 2 to 3 hours on the early posts. On the second site, I spend 30 minutes max. So that's like something you could wildly scale up and for at least a few years probably make a couple 100,000 off of. So
yeah.
I think I'm not going to call it the failure yet. Like dollar wise,
no, it doesn't sound like it.
Well, like I said, they were started around though, granted the same time, and one this last month it did 21 or 22,000. So of course, 22. Would you take 22,000 or like a little over $200? Like the answer is pretty obvious, but that site may have had some luck, but again, I think it got a faster start than the other site, and definitely I poured more time into it. So if you front load, a site with content, and the more and more you do that, like, yeah, you can see like rapid growth, like in the later months. Now, for anyone listening, it's important to note that the timeline of all of this is probably at least 6 months faster than like if I were working with somebody or trying to help them grow their site. I would probably say you should expect more like a 18 to 24 month like timeline to reach a site's sort of maximum potential, like as a solo operator. That's just my experience. I have 25 like sites that are active that are earning some amount of money. So I know that because that's like, I think the limit of my Kinsta plan, and I'm like already paying so much in hosting that I'm like,
dude.
I can't go up any, like at some point I'm just going to get in trouble. So I'm like that I've held the line on, but I have a lot of these sites to draw data from. And that's the other thing is, that's another reason you should just start your site is this niche was sort of related to another site I had built years ago. And that site, I didn't have the knowledge or I didn't apply the time, but I did get some keyword data that was interesting that at least for a few of the articles, I was like, these are supposed to be like zero traffic, articles and search terms. And I'm seeing 500 page views a month, maybe even 1,000. So it definitely that's the real benefit of experimenting with all this. If nothing else, you're just gathering like invaluable proprietary data to inform future sites. So
yeah, for sure, man. Well, Casey, I've already kept you over just a couple of minutes. First of all, thank you for all this. Absolutely fascinating for all the things. I am a big experimenter myself, and I just think it's cool. I'm a nerd. Bloggingguide.com is where the public follow along with Casey's journey sort of stuff lives. Is that correct? You have a YouTube channel or any other socials that you would point people to?
I'm not that active on Twitter. There is a blogging guide handle on there, operated by me. But the other place would be, I have like kind of a parallel Substack newsletter under the name Blogging Guide. And so yeah, that offers both insights for the free subscribers, and there's a paid option in there too. But honestly, my philosophy is really like, if you pay, I take it as a compliment, and I'm more like a tip. I do put the best stuff out in public on Blogging Guide for free. So like, there aren't secrets really in the the premium sections. It's just better organized and yeah, stuff like that.
So people can find that, the Substack, like opt-in on Blogging Guide?
You can find that on there too, yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool, Casey. Well, thank you again, man. This has been a delight.
All right. Thanks for having me, Peter. Appreciate it.